Hi, this is Megha Joshi, the host of the Boardroom Zen podcast. This show is created for the ambitious business leaders. Are you someone wanting to play big? Want to possess a strong brand and executive presence that makes you belong in every room you walk into? And all of this without putting your personal life on hold? If the answer to those questions is yes, then you are in the right place. In this show, I sit down with best-in-class leaders to distill their wisdom while sharing what helped me stand out as a Fortune 100 executive. So let's get started. Our guest today is an impressive leader who also happens to be a dear friend of mine. He went from being a homeless high school dropout to an award-winning executive in tech. This journey inspired him to help other professionals achieve their goals through his company, Corporate Dad. With an extensive background spanning over 2 decades in customer relationship management in retail and tech support, he has built several departments internationally for Fortune 100, 500 companies, and now serves as the Vice President of Support for the tech unicorn, Dutchie. Please join me in welcoming Sean Ilenrey to the show. Sean, such a delight to have you here.
Thank you. The pleasure's all mine.
I've been wanting to get you on the show for a bit, so thanks for making time for me. And I have to say, your journey, Sean, is very, very fascinating to me as I view your life trajectory going from homelessness and being a high school dropout to achieving so much success in the boardrooms as a revered executive. I just want to know, what turn of events or circumstances shaped this incredible journey for you?
I love this question. For me, it's interesting because statistically, I definitely should not be where I am today. And I think it makes me more grateful for it. I think a lot of times we grow in our careers, we may not necessarily stop and say, wow, I'm thankful for what I achieved. And this was never the path I saw for myself. I actually loved music growing up. I was an artist to say, I was a dancer. So I never imagined myself in the corporate environment. But as I began to end high school, my mother, she actually got sick and she had kidney failure. And so we were in a position where I was highly intelligent. Teachers would always say, oh, he's really smart. I passed tests really easily, but I missed a lot of classes. I wasn't showing up when I needed to. I didn't have discipline. I would actually go skip work to school to go to work and try to be able to help out the family. So I was working since I was really in 8th grade, trying to help out the family. And my focus was never on school, it was always on how do I help for the betterment of my family. And it got to a place where when my mother finally sold her home, avoiding foreclosure because she had to quit her career because of disability, I found myself in a place where I helped her through that. But now she's living in my best friend's attic and I'm living in my car. And all of my friends are off at school and I'm watching my life kind of pass me by. And I'm at a point where I don't feel as if, I'm living up to measure. But there were really 3 key lessons that helped me along the way. One of them being storytelling. So when I think about my career, your career has to tell a story. So at this time, I'm working in retail, start getting myself back on my feet. But I was able to migrate that retail work into working in the pharmacy. The pharmacy then led me into a contact center that was based on pharmacy technicians, which then led me into medical contact centers, which I grew into workforce management and started leading organizations across the globe. And what I've done throughout my career, everything that I've done kind of ties back to one another. So it's really about that storytelling where I've been able to build in my experience because I didn't just walk away from where I began. 2, the other big thing was study ethic. We talk about work ethic and it's great to work hard, it's important, but I got obsessed with learning. So even to this day, I'm constantly in the podcast, I'm constantly on YouTube gathering information. I just constantly want to feed myself first thing in the morning. What am I most insecure about? Let me identify what that is and now feed myself so I can fix that gap. And for a long time, it was leadership. I wanted to figure out how to be a better leader. So every morning I digested it. And then number 1 is really risk taking. I think taking big bets on myself and knowing, hey, let's go ahead and move to Mexico and build a department from scratch. Let's go ahead and move across the country again. Let's take on a department or an organization that's not performing well and see if I can come in and make a difference. Those are really the 3 key things that helped me along the way.
That's so interesting. And all of those are incredibly powerful, Sean, I have to say. Tell me more about your risk-taking appetite. And a lot of us struggle with that because we want to take risks, but fear comes in the way. So
Yeah.
when you were making those big decisions for yourself, what was going on for you? What stories were you telling yourself to be able to take on that risk?
Yeah, the biggest thing for me was I want to be purposefully uncomfortable. That's where I want to be in my career. And I saw myself consistently seeking growth opportunities. And I would look at some of my peers who, no disrespect, but I would see them work the same roles for maybe 3 to 4 to 5 years, maybe even 10 years in that same analyst role. And I knew that I wanted more for myself. But in order for me to obtain that and be able to have a bigger influence and bigger impact, I had to be willing to go places others weren't willing to go. So what ended up happening was I sought these opportunities that were difficult, that were challenges, that were, can you turn this team around? Can you build this team from scratch? And I looked at it a lot like building a muscle. For those of us who try to build muscle in the gym, you have to tear it in order to build a new one. And that's the key, is that wherever you go, it's going to be hard. It's not going to be easy. But as you begin to get momentum, you'll be able to turn it around. So when I look at my career, being purposely uncomfortable, I find myself in rooms with people who have far more years of experience, let's say at the executive level, and they're wondering, how did I get there? And it was kind of one of those things where if you look at their career, I compare it to a laundry detergent bottle. You have laundry detergent bottles that can say, hey, this bottle will do 20 loads, and it's a huge bottle. Then you have this very small bottle and it can do 40 loads. And even though there's not as much volume, it's more concentrated. So throughout my career, I've been very intentional in being purposely uncomfortable so that each year of my experience is highly concentrated.
Wow. Oh my gosh. You shared so much, Sean. So first theme that jumped off the page was you've always taken the road less traveled. And I also know that you were a super young executive. You became a vice president probably at the age of 28 or so. And so you were in those boardrooms rubbing shoulders with highly seasoned, very experienced executives. How did you truly, in those moments, reshape your story? Because I'm sure others in the room were looking at you and saying, what is this young kid doing here?
Absolutely. And if they weren't saying it, I was saying it to myself.
Yes.
It's one of those things where I remember my first year as a director, I was so insecure. And the building I worked in, the company I worked for, was a smaller organization that had been around for 30 years. So I went from this very large company to a smaller company where now I'm bringing a lot of experience there, but all of my peers were at least 20 years older than me. So I remember being insecure, but what I would do is that I would lean into that. So I dressed the way that I felt like, if this is the person I want to become, let me dress like that person. And I know, as embarrassing as that sounds, it's just, I created an image of who is the leader I want to be, who is the man I want to be. Regardless of what the dress code is, I'm going to come to work in a suit. That's just where I was in my life at the time. And also I knew that what they need from me is not for me to show up, not for me to prove that I'm the best, but needed me to show up and make sure I'm asking the right questions to move the conversation forward. And I think a lot of times we think we have to have all the answers. And I learned that's not what it's about. It's how do you move forward by unlocking what we should be focusing on. And I added a lot of value. So my peers didn't see me as, hey, who is this kid anymore? They saw me as a resource that they could lean on. But I was also humble and took advantage of the fact that I was younger. So when you're younger in the rooms, then I could connect more to the front line that was around my age. So I was a bridge between generations where I could understand the work ethic of those before us, but also understand that as millennials, we want to do work and business a little bit differently.
Yeah. And you essentially turned that limitation into an opportunity for yourself, into your own superpower, is what I hear you say. And there's a saying, Sean, and I hope I don't butcher it, but it says it's not about the years of experience you have, it's about the experience in the years.
Ooh.
So it's the intensity, the depth of experiences you pack in a short number of years. That's what truly matters.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, I love that. I'm going to write that down.
It's not mine. I'm sure I heard it somewhere. But I have to say that myself, I was a young executive in the room, and I have felt the same way, especially as a minority and a woman. It just felt like I was the only one and the youngest kid on the block. And I could see it in the eyes of others where I always had to come in and prove myself to showcase my self-worth. And that's okay. I have no concerns with that. And what I tell people, and you said it so beautifully, is that we don't have to wait for our hair to turn gray to
Yes.
be in those powerful positions. It's about who we are and what experiences we're bringing, and that's what truly matters. And so I love this discussion, and I'd love to switch gears now into the space of personal branding that I
Yes.
know you are so big into. I know you're an author and you speak on this topic as well. So in the realm of personal branding, I see you living it every day. And so what strategies specifically, Sean, do you deploy to communicate and strengthen your personal brand on an ongoing basis?
Oh, thank you for bringing this one up. To your point, I'm passionate about it. For me, it can, and I even heard you say something along these lines too, is that your personal brand really is what is said about you when you're not in the room. You want them to know who you are and what you embody so that whether you're there or not, they understand what you're bringing to the table. And for me, I knew there were four key things that I wanted to come off when it comes to my brand. I wanted to be known as knowledgeable. I know what I'm talking about. I have information, but I wanted to also be relatable. You can relate to me. As I mentioned before, I wanted to be that bridge between generations, bridge between first generation Americans, bridge between minorities, whatever it may be. Also, I wanted to be known as empathetic. I can connect with you. I know what you're going through. I know your journey. We are on the same page. But last, I wanted to be known as memorable because you can have those first three. But if what I do is not memorable, if it doesn't make enough impact, then I've kind of dropped the ball. So I always think, what can I leave behind when I'm not in the room as well? That way they do remember me. So when I join organizations, let's say I'm there 3 years, I want to create systems and processes that long after I'm gone, I made it easier for that next generation to pick up. And I got super passionate about sharing my story. And I said, you know what? There's someone else out there that's where I was a few years ago. How do I now be more open about it? Here I am, an African-American leader working in tech in the cannabis industry. And you don't ever see us in this industry.
Right.
I'm a double minority where I wanted to be an example to others, but then also to say, I had a lot of virtual mentors in my life, not necessarily face to face, not many of those, surprisingly. There were so many virtual mentors I would look at over the years, and how can I do that for someone else? So as a person who's focused on their personal brand, their professional brand, how can I now give information, show that I'm knowledgeable, relatable, empathetic, and memorable, but do it in a way that's serving others, not just serving myself?
That's beautiful. And I agree with you 100%. People have to know us, they have to like us, and then finally they have to trust us. So there's this continuum of know, like, trust. And that's what you're building by bringing in the power of emotional intelligence, because a lot of these things, being relatable, being empathetic, being memorable, all hits on those elements. Now, yes, knowledge could be more a dimension of IQ, if you will.
Yes.
But everything else, what you said, about 75% is all about EQ. And it's so powerful. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm also curious, Sean, clearly you mentioned your journey of coming from such humble beginnings, and you didn't have the luxury of very well-educated or extremely successful parents that could provide you great education and network and what have you. How did you find these mentors for yourself and use that to electrify your presence in who you became over time?
I think it's interesting. I'm at a point in my career, in my life, where a lot of people approach me and say, hey, will you mentor me? And I didn't do that personally a lot early on. Early on in my career, as I mentioned, it was about the virtual mentors for me. And I would pick them for different reasons. I'd pick Indra Nooyi, the former CEO of PepsiCo, because I loved the way that she cared about whatever we do in this business. It's about profits, but yes, we have to have a purpose and a passion about it. I love Marcus Lemonis because he could walk into any organization and understand how to move them forward with EQ, no matter what they were going through. So I saw these different leaders and these different elements, and I would mix them together and kind of study them every day and use them to my advantage. Then I got to a point in my career where I started being noticed. And then I started having an idea of a direction I wanted to go. And that's when I started to seek out mentors and say, okay, I need a mentor here because I need to understand, how can I get a little bit better? It's one thing for me to watch my virtual mentors, but I need a person who can watch me and then say, hey, here are your habits. Here's where I'm seeing, here's where you're missing your shots you're throwing up. Here's how you can improve your scoring potential. And that was great for me. So I was very intentional about the mentors, but then I also looked for sponsors. And those are very different things. Whereas your mentor is going to guide you and develop you and coach you, but your sponsors are going to speak for you when you're not able to speak up for yourself. They're going to be the ones saying, hey, we have this amazing talent in the California region that I really believe that if we put them in the right room, they could do great. So especially in the interview process, a lot of these, when you get to the executive level, it's a committee decisions. Who's backing you up? Who's speaking on your behalf? Those interpersonal relationships are so important. So it started off with virtual. Then I maximized my mentors in person by being strategic. And then I was also adding my sponsors there as well.
Yeah, clearly you've been incredibly thoughtful and strategic in your endeavors when it comes to finding mentors, whether they're in your reach or beyond, and then also identifying sponsors that could vouch for you. And that's incredible. And thank you for making the distinction between mentors and sponsors, because most of us don't make that distinction in our heads. So that was helpful. And I've had the privilege of having several sponsors and mentors in my life. And since we're talking about this topic of personal branding, I just want to talk about an instance where I was being supported and mentored by this top-notch executive, and she was a trailblazer, women leader, highly accomplished for her age. And she said to me that, Megha, always remember that anything and everything you touch, you are putting your personal stamp on it, no matter what it is. Even if it's an email that just got forwarded to you and you are forwarding it to your network or to your stakeholders, by virtue of just forwarding that email without reading it, you still own it and your brand's on it.
Oh,
so that stuck with me. And as we think about personal branding, that's what I always have in the back of my mind. It is, what am I touching? Because I'm putting my brand on it.
absolutely. Oh, I love that. And if I can touch on that a little bit, we have to be very mindful of the people around us because they impact your brand as well. So it's not just the things you touch, but the people you touch as well. Who's coming from you and who's coming into you, who's navigating or going around, the ecosystem with you. You will be judged and they can either bring your brand up or bring them down. So I love that you said that.
Yeah, that's such a great call out. It's by virtue of association, our brand is evolving. So we got to be very intentional about that.
Yes.
All right. So Sean, now next up, I want to talk about how you operate in stressful situations. And I know you just came back from a global trip to the Caribbean and South America and Asia, and you were out and away, and you have this corporate job, you have a family, and you also run your business. Amidst all this, I can't imagine how you manage yourself and the pressure that you take on. So what are some of your go-to coping mechanisms or strategies that you turn to bolster your ability to perform in those moments?
Wow. I always ask myself, why do I continue to chase stress? It feels like I'm always in a stressful situation. What's interesting is that if you met me when I was about 12 years old, I had a serious anger problem. I was emotional. I was dealing with a lot of trauma and things regarding me. My parents had split up and I was still working to get over that, even though it happened years ago. And if you know me now, you will rarely see me angry. It's very difficult.
Right.
It's just rare to see that with me. But naturally, my personality, I'm a very outgoing, I'm a very open person. I love to talk. I love to have a good time. But during times of stress, I become someone else and I become very stoic. And I like to imagine, and I didn't notice this. My peers called this out for me a few years back, and I didn't realize this is what I was doing. But whenever everything's going crazy around me, it's a storm, I always find myself in the eye of the storm calm. And I don't get caught up in the emotions. I don't get caught up in the stress of it. It's more so, how do we chase the data that shows us the path to get us to a better direction? And it doesn't mean that I'm not open to seeing what people are going through emotionally, because you have to be there for your team. But it just means that my emotions aren't driving my decision. It's my calmness is helping me through it. Now, I'm scared to death in these moments. You wouldn't be able to tell, but it's just the way my mind works. I have to slow everything down. And I'm so data centric. But the problem is that your battery begins to drain down. That emotional, that spiritual battery over time goes down. And I actually, for a person who loves to listen to speeches, podcasts, even lectures, I'm not the biggest fan of motivational speeches. And the reason why is that when I hear something, I take action. So I tend to avoid those until I need them. So when I have these stressful moments, that's when I'm turning on my Tony Robbins, I'm turning on my Les Brown, I'm turning on John Maxwell, these leaders that'll inspire me to do better. And that's kind of where I kind of take my coffee, so to speak, because I know I need to make sure I'm feeding myself in those moments too.
Yes, and so powerful, Sean, I have to say. And the reality is, and you hit on it, we cannot serve from an empty pot. We have to recharge our batteries across these different dimensions, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, if you will.
Absolutely.
And if we don't refill ourselves in any of those dimensions, then we're not going to be in a high performing state. We may look like we are, but then it's not going to last too long. So I love your advice of turning to that piece of motivation and looking at who could help you regain your power in those weak moments. And so that's beautiful. And so as we are coming to a close here, Sean, any parting thoughts you would like to share with the listeners here?
If I could go back and talk to my 18, 19-year-old self, when I thought my life was just at the end of my life, my world is over, everything I've done in my life, I failed. I know there's people who are going through what I went through, not at 19, but at 25, at 35, at 45, at 60. And I'd like to say two things. Number one, you can always rewrite your story. Whether you're Colonel Sanders making changes at the age of 60 in your career, whether you're Oprah who had success later on in life as well, we all have the ability to rewrite that story and say, I'm not what I was, or I can take what I was and use it as a testimony to how I became what I am today, because it's still a part of my story, but I can rewrite that ending chapter. So definitely always believe that what you're going through is not defining where you're going to end up. And the second thing is maximize LinkedIn. As superficial as that sounds, we really are in a time right now, for the first time in our careers as professionals, we truly own our own stories. We truly own what we can tell about ourselves. And if you don't, someone else will. So it's not just about your recommendations anymore, what your company last said about you. You can actually put your voice out there and be heard. As I mentioned earlier, inspire others who are a different version of yourself. But take advantage of your brand right now and make sure you maximize it, because you never know how your story can change the lives of someone else.
What great takeaways, Sean. In listening to those, it almost feels like you're a brother from a different mother to me, because all you said is, I just couldn't help but nod internally and say, yes, 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 to each one of that. So thank you for sharing all that wisdom with the listeners today and for being so generous with your time. It's a delight to have you and look forward to catching up sometime soon.
Thank you. I appreciate your time as well.
Thank you. There is no better time than now to stop playing small and tap into your zone of genius. With a Boardroom Zen executive coach by your side, experience the game-changing transformation, both internally and externally. Find out more on boardroomzen.com. And thank you for listening to my show. It means so much to me. I'd love for you to subscribe and leave a review on your favorite listening platform. More power to you, and hope to see you soon.